Great Monday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. It's been a while since we've been on this
Hello, Reggie.
podcast
Are you with
together.
me?
Yeah. And so I'm looking forward to it.
I haven't seen you since last year. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been three weeks.
One of the questions I've learned to rephrase this year is instead of asking how's New Year treating you, putting the onus and the power upon you, and say how are you treating New Year? And so how are you treating New Year?
Oh, that's well from behind my own eyes, from my own perspective. I think I'm treating the new year well. It's still early, but my energy is good, and I'm doing a lot of writing. And so far, I think I'm doing a reasonably good job. How about you?
Well, I'm off to a great start. I'm laying out clearly more defined habits. I've learned that instead of working on goals, you work on habits. Because goals are always going to be things that you can achieve, and then once you achieve them, you either may get depressed or you always got to keep escalating. But goals are always moving the goalposts, literally. So what I'm looking at is what I've learned from some of the studying that I've been doing recently is it's better to look at changing your habits. What are your habits you want to create in the new year? So that's what I'm kind of focused on. The habit of eating healthier, the habits of making sure that I get in more me time and get more things done that's important to me as far as mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually in the day, and less trying to squeeze those things in the evening. And so far this year, I've been pretty much owning that. So I want to continue building upon that, continue growing, and I'm looking forward to the infinite possibilities that they may provide.
Yeah, I love that idea of habits. I think we do similar things, not specifically what we do, but I tend to use the word practice, and I have certain practices that they change over time, but that I'm committed to. That is how I begin my day, and I definitely agree with you. Um, like I don't want to have to get things done later in the evening. That's when I begin to recover from the day, and I just don't have the energy level. I'm not at my best in the evening. It's a good time to relax, read, be in conversation, but I like that idea of habits or practices as opposed to goals. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
And we didn't get started with our normal um, customary practices, as you say, which
Hmm.
is to ask you, what's your spiritual energy level?
So I'm a 10. I'm choosing 10 this morning. Before we got on, I mentioned that I rent a nice spot here in Connecticut, and it's a long driveway, and it has to get plowed. And we had a foot of snow yesterday, and the guy who's supposed to plow just never showed up on Sunday, and they didn't show up this morning, so I had to get in touch with him, and um, it ended up his truck broke down, but he didn't communicate that. He just didn't show up. And so once we got on the same page, he's going to get here later today. Um, I say that as an example because my initial response was it was irresponsible of him not to show up. Did he forget? Then I found out his truck broke down. I said, all right, I have some compassion for that because he's out there fixing a truck in below freezing weather. But then I still err on the side of, all right, if I can't make to a client meeting, or if I couldn't get on a call with you, or you couldn't get on this podcast with me, we always communicated as soon as possible. So the communication thing fell apart. So, but I gradually am being less judgmental, which is hard for me because I'm judgmental. But it was again, I got to practice that this morning with a guy that I don't really know. He's new. Getting people to plow snow nowadays is really hard because there's not much snow and it's not worth it for them to do it, at least here in the Northeast. So,
And I'm sure he doesn't want to miss out on any money either. If he has
Right.
a truck, I'm sure he actually looks forward to the snow as a way to generate some revenue. And you don't want to wake up and your truck not working. I'm sure that was really a frustrating experience for him because of the money he's missing out on, as well as how the clients you all are feeling. So, the longer he has to wait to get his truck fixed, the less likely you are going to wait and maybe have to choose another company, and all that is going through his mind as he's racing to get that truck fixed. So I'm sure that's something that's a high priority to him on a lot of levels. It's a horrible way to start the new year as well, as you're thinking.
Yeah, and
sometimes you be.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, sometimes you have those little warnings that you see, you choose to ignore, and then truck doesn't start, and now it's like, damn, I wish I had gotten that fixed. I wish I had dealt with that, So those are the kind of things I'm learning to listen to the warning signs now as I get older, and as I want to become more efficient with my time, is pay more attention to the warning signs and deal with those issues and problems while they're smaller, as opposed to putting off. And then, because it always seems to happen on the worst day. Like, for example, your tire is low and you get an indicator, low tire, and you ignore it, then it's always going to be the day that you have a client meeting, you're running late, and you'll go outside and you're going to have the air is not going to be in the tire. And it's like, I could have dealt with that 2 or 3 days ago. So I just want to add that quick point.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and going our tradition, we still want to keep going with how we always normally begin, which is with our gratitude moments. We kind of talked about some of the things we're grateful for already, so we just make it formal. I'll go first and say that I'm grateful for life, health, the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind, as well as a mother who's survived and still have sound mind and good spirits to 2024. So I'm blessed to have her love energy still with me. And then I'm also grateful for the opportunity to connect with you. Again, this is our first time this year. So I've learned not to take relationships for granted, because it seems the older I get, the less relationships, or should I say, the less strong energy I have in the relationships. I still have a lot of relationships with people, but the energy is not as strong or not as vibrating at the frequency I would like. So I'm learning to be much more appreciative and much more grateful for the relationships that I do have that operate the frequency of growth, of learning, of joy and fulfillment when I have those kind of connections, and you're one of them. So that adds to my level of gratitude as well. So just want to share that. And then lastly, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide as well.
Yeah. So thank you for including me in the worthwhile relationship category. So I'm grateful, as typically I'm grateful to have indoor plumbing, heat in a, pretty cold winter day up here with some snow on the ground, a refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it. And I get to get up in the morning and do things I care about. One of which is being in conversation with you once a week. But I don't go to a job that I don't want to do in order to have money. So I feel really blessed to be able to say that. Again, I'm not wealthy. I don't have lots and lots of money piled up behind me. I need to keep working, but having a sense of purpose and really caring about the work I do is a big deal. So I'm definitely grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, how about we go ahead and you walk us into what our topic is going to be today. Looking forward to a wonderful discussion as well.
Yeah. So as we've been doing for year and a half plus now, we're speaking about Healing America's Narratives, 2022 book, and the subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And today we're going to actually continue something we were doing towards the end of 2023 and kind of drill down a little bit deeper with it, and specifically dealing with that subtitle, The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. So from an early age, young boys and young girls are conditioned to fit into traditionally stereotypical masculine and feminine roles. Now, because we've been aware of that for some decades now, if you're fortunate enough to have the right parents, or the right parents in quotation marks, and good teachers, the stereotypes are gradually being loosened, but they're still very, very strong. And increasing research has shown that from a very young age, I'll take them one at a time. Young boys tend to be more distracted and more unruly when they're younger in school. They can't sit still. They get diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. They don't do as well academically traditionally as the girls do in their elementary school classes. And then gradually they come into their own in early adolescence and late adolescence, and they feel more comfortable in their roles as young men. Young girls tend to be more disciplined, better academically, and able to sit still and do what's expected of them in elementary school. And gradually, as they enter into adolescence, they become increasingly anxious, very often nowadays depressed, and really struggle in adolescence. So as far back as the late 19th century, there were some people recognized that tendency. It's not a contemporary thing. It's not that it's just suddenly happened because of COVID or smartphones. The pandemic and social media have definitely made these things worse in some ways, but it's not something that's new. It's been there for a while. And arguably, the groundbreaking researcher at first on studies of girls and women, Carol Gilligan, who's in her 80s now, and who just came out with a new book not this year anymore, in late 2023, September 2023. She's just giving us increasingly more insight into why there's that almost opposite movement where the girls start off kind of grounded and okay in school and then get anxious and depressed. The boys start off kind of unruly in school and then kind of grow into more comfort in adolescence. And the big picture that Gilligan points to, and it's something that her language is a little bit different, but you and I have been speaking about it in different ways. She basically points out that, again, we live in a traditionally patriarchal society. And in her definition, patriarchy has at least two big characteristics. One is there's a gender binary. In other words, there's men and how men should be, and there's women and how women should be, and it's hierarchical. The men are on top and the women are on the bottom of the hierarchy. So what they've discovered, and I'm going to just maybe speak for another 60 to 90 seconds and then see what you're hearing as I say this. Early on, young boys really do care about relationship, and they do care about a lot of things. But between the ages of 4 and 7, and this research bears this out, they begin to get conditioned to grow into men, to be a man, to do the things that men need to do in the world. And they get those messages from culture, from society, from their parents, and even from some teachers. Young girls are conditioned to be nice, to care about others, and not to have a voice of their own. So in summary, and this is just a really easy way to say this, it's not superficial, it's accurate, but it's a real shortcut. Gilligan says that young girls are taught to care, but not to know. So a lot of the young girls, when asked for their opinion, will say, I don't know. Young boys are taught to know and not to care. So as they get older, a common response that they use is, I don't care. And the research, what Gilligan basically is saying is all of those voices, the voice of knowing, the voice of caring, those are just human voices. And society has said girls should do this, they should care. Boys should do this, they should know, because they need to know to run the world. And girls have to grow up into nice women to be, take care of everybody. Now, obviously, there are, we had evidence of that back in the 70s. We had the women's movement. We had Title IX in education, which is really a civil rights act extension, where in terms of sports and education, they had invested much money in women's sports as in men's sports. So there's been progress. We've had a couple of women come close to the White House. We have lots more women now in the federal government, but it's nowhere near equal. When I say the federal government, I mean in Congress and the Senate, but it's still nowhere near equal. So there's this underlying belief that tens of millions of Americans and lots of people around the world still have, that men are dominant, women are submissive, and that's the way it should be. And it shows up in our society. So that was kind of a long, slightly unwieldy introduction, but that's where we are today in terms of this patriarchy that's gender binary and hierarchical. What do you think?
Well, several thoughts came to my mind while you were talking about that. But I'm going to phrase those in a couple of questions first and foremost. So with that, what do you see? And I know it's kind of maybe obvious from the context of we've lived through it, and so we've seen the results, but what are some of the other problems you see continuing that the binary, as you said, that men say, I don't care, and women say, I don't know. Continuing that thought process, those behavior traits, what do you see as a problem going to continue down that particular pathway?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes, that's a great, thank you for that question. The first thing that comes to my mind, it may not be the most important thing, but I'm going to go with what popped up first, is that if we continue down that pathway, we're guaranteeing that both girls and boys, men and women, will continue to only develop a part of their full humanity. In other words, in my experience, the most well-adjusted human beings that I know, the healthiest human beings I know, healthy, physically healthy, yes, but I don't really mean that, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually healthy people I know, have the ability and practice the ability to both know and to care. They believe in both justice and mercy, wisdom and compassion. In other words, they have integrated what have stereotypically been referred to as feminine energy or masculine energy into themselves, regardless if they're biologically a man or a woman, regardless of their sexual orientation, and even regardless of how they identify, in terms of sexuality. So if it continues, we'll continue to have split people who only developed one part of their full humanity. And that's a problem. So that's the first, I think that might be the biggest one. But there are other smaller issues. I'll give you one other small issue. Because of the nature of how men and women, girls and boys have been conditioned, it's much more important in our society for a girl or a woman to be considered physically attractive. All right. That may be shifting a little bit because there are lots of men who want to be looking good too. But what ends up happening, and this is where social media comes into play and smartphones, because of Instagram and probably to a lesser degree Twitter, but Instagram, Facebook, any social media platform, YouTube included, there's a real pressure for young girls, adolescent girls, to look good. And because the technology allows them to change, to what do they call it, airbrushing their photographs and changing the videos, young girls see all these allegedly beautiful girls and women on social media and feel they don't measure up. And as long as they've been taught to be nice, to be pretty, and to be attractive to men, If they feel they don't measure up, that leads to feelings of anxiety, depression, and even suicidal ideation for young girls. So that's a more specific example that feeds into the problem that girls face, because again, if the boys are saying I don't care, as long as they can get to do what they want to do, and whether and the stereotype is the student athlete playing sports, they can be tough guys and not care, but that's still a binary, because they're not allowed to care. And if they show empathy and compassion and caring, they're not a real man. They didn't suck it up. They can't complain. So it continues, and again, we can see differences. I mean, guys and girls who are accomplished student athletes. It was just one example. That's a helpful move. Oh, I can be athletic and do well in the classroom as well, breaking the stereotype of the dumb jock that, if that was ever really true or not, but it was used very often. But I think that idea, again, that we'll have partial human beings if this gender binary hierarchy continues, that's probably the biggest societal problem that we'll face. And that's a big problem. We don't have fully integrated human beings. We're not fully human. And we can't then, to use our language, connect as full humans, because we have to be biased one way or another.
Yeah, this is a very important topic, and unfortunately, we're having some technical issues with our internet source, because there's definitely some buffering that's happening and some freezing that's happening on your part. I'm sure you're probably seeing it on my part as well. So I apologize to our listening audience for the buffering. We'll get that worked out as we continue to go forth. But I did want to acknowledge that there is some delays, some buffering, and some freezing of the video. So I'm hoping you hear me well while I'm talking now. Based on your answer, I love your answer, because that really nails it, that you're only getting half of the development. And as we really begin to move toward begin the journey of becoming more fully human, you have to begin as your own deep analysis, introspective analysis of yourself. You have to begin to look at and see, to use your language, based on your cultural givens, how you were raised and what's lacking in your fully human development. And I mean to say that because I give you an example of what I mean. This is a time of the year that I watch sports more than I normally do, mainly because it's the playoffs, and a little satisfaction is there because the city that I spent a lot of time investing in the last couple of years, and I've been a Ravens fan for the last 10 years or so, they're number one seed, so that has my interest more so than it normally would, to see how they're going to play things out. So I watched the video of the sports analysis on YouTube, and ESPN, for example, now has more female analysts than maybe Fox does. And these female analysts obviously are not former football players. They couldn't be. They're journalists. And they tend to make comments from a journalistic perspective. Now, the athletes now, because all the podcasts are coming up with what they call the new media, where you have former athletes now creating their own podcasts. And so you don't have to watch ESPN, Fox. You can go directly to the source to hear an athlete give his perspective on how the game was, or analysis of the game. So where I'm going with this is, it's been a couple of instances where the athlete has given his analysis, a former athlete, on his own podcast, and then that's being used because ESPN needs content. So they'll watch the athlete's podcast, and then they'll make a comment based off what the former player has said. And I noticed that on several occasions, the ESPN female analyst has, when she makes her comment about the former player, she doesn't make a comment about his comment or his analysis. She tends to make it personal about how he's dressed or how he looks. And that sets off a wave of issues for men who are upset about that. And you think about that in the normal female male dynamic, particularly in the Black culture, that's where a lot of relationships have had issues because women know how to hit men on those areas like that. They go at those personal attacks. At least that's what men believe, and that's what men say. And so as a result, they now a lot of sports people are leaving ESPN. They're not interested in watching ESPN for those reasons. They're saying you have a female journalist who don't have football experience, and they're making personal attacks instead of attacking the actual analysis that the player gave. And I mentioned all that to say is listen to what you laid out from the very beginning as far as how young boys and young girls are raised with the women saying, I don't know, and the men say, I don't care. How much that's steeped into how this behavior now, as we're beginning to be more where we feel the need to say, well, we got to have more female representation across the board. If people are fully developed and fully human, how the women going to be able to fit into that new role, then how the men going to be accepting of the women in the role, with both of them are lacking the full, men lacking the female development behavior characteristics, and the females lacking the male behavior development characteristics. Seeing how that play itself out now, it's becoming more divisive. And I'm using that sports example as just one example that I'm seeing now in the real world as a result of that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Excuse me, that example, which I wasn't aware of. That I watch a little bit more sports this time of year too, but probably not that much. And I like watching the competition, whether it's track and field, football, basketball. I actually keep the analysis low. I don't really need people telling me what I'm watching because I can kind of see what happens. So I don't listen to that much analysis. But I will say, I agree with you, and I would add that part of that is that developmental piece and that gender binary that we're speaking about. And part of it, I also wonder if it's about knowledge. So good journalists, and there are some good journalists who cover sports, I believe. I don't think there are as many as there used to be because there's so much sports coverage now. There are more people who get to do it. And I think some of them get caught up in the betting. They get caught up in personalities as opposed to getting, to reporting on the actual competition itself. And that's my bias. That's a definite bias that I have. But I wonder, as you said, if some of these women, and again, I haven't seen this, so this is really a true question, and especially with football, because I mean, football is a pretty complex game. I mean, all of the sports are, if you really get down to the nitty gritty of how they're played. But if you don't understand the game and you get a job covering it at some level, it's a pretty easy move to comment on somebody's wardrobe or their appearance. So you don't have to get into the things you don't really understand. So part of that, all I'm saying is beyond the gender binary, which I think is definitely there, it might just be a matter of comfort and competence, because it's hard to be comfortable, especially with a camera in your face, if you don't really know what you're talking about. Now, let me put an asterisk there. I didn't just say that some of these female journalists and ESPN, as you refer to them, don't know what you're talking about, because I haven't seen them myself. But they haven't played the game. And, but again, I don't think that.
And
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to add to that I think that, at least from my perspective, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but what they have to learn how to do is that, see, men are going to be more tolerant if your analysis is an analysis. So, for example, if a woman says, well, Another female Fox reporter came out and said that Lamar Jackson, the Ravens quarterback, she felt wasn't quarterbacky enough for her. She wants her quarterbacks to be more quarterbacky, meaning that, because he's considered to be an athlete and right quarterback first, that's how he came into the league, that he can't be an accurate in the pocket passing quarterback. So her comment was, I want him to be more quarterbacky. Well, that blew up. That comment went viral. And so she pretty much got attacked quite a bit. Not only did he show the very next game that he can sit in the pocket and throw, and it's been doing that most of the year, but a lot of people were talking about the term quarterbacky. Like, where did she come up with that? That's not even a real word, and no one has ever used that expression before. So where I'm going with this is that women entering into this domain of commenting about a sport that they obviously can't play, but can comment on as a journalist from a context of just seeing what they're seeing on the field and comment within their lane, or when they step outside their lane, they're definitely much more heavily criticized and less accepted into the male and I would say sphere of football, which as football is highly, as you know, highly testosterone. It's male at the highest level. It's energy, it's aggression, it's all that. It's not meant to have any kind of female qualities in it, unless you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's meant to be as male as possible. So I'm just saying, listening from a context of putting it in the perspective or the lens of the binary and the cultural givens and the way boys and girls are raised, that to me clearly becomes a clear example full time of how, if you don't get fully developed, what it's going to look like from a recipient perspective, of the male hearing information and the females giving information. And it's going to be interesting to see how that gets navigated going forward, because as society, and of course, we want to see more women in roles and positions that historically have been only allowed to men. But when you do that, how do you phase that in to the point where it's acceptable and honored and appreciated for what it is? Now, there are some great female journalists, let me be clear on that, who just give analysis of the game, and they're admired and revered because they keep it they don't go personal about the athlete's wardrobe or the athlete's character or things of that nature. So those women who's learned how to just let me analyze the game from a journalist perspective of what I do know about the game, the X's and O's, and keep their comments within their lane, they tend to be more accepted by men and more, I would say, appreciated by men, to the point where men will listen to them. But the women, once they do step out their lane once, it's like they're branded in that area. And so they get discounted anything else they say out of their mouth because of that personal comment. And so now I just wanted to reiterate and make sure I was clear on, there's some great women journalists who do analyze football and give some valuable insight and give some valuable perspective. But I do want to add this comment real quick. That is, taking it beyond football, just using football as an example, just in communication alone between a man and a woman, I wonder how what would you say are ways that men who understand that they may be lacking in feminine development, what can they do now can they care, and how do you go and trigger the caring behavior characteristics? How do you begin to care more once you realize that you've been taught not to care, and now you should begin to care more if you're going to develop more as a fully human? How do they begin to sharpen or strengthen that caring behavior characteristic, so to speak?
Yeah, so I'll answer that, and then I want to make a comment on the reporting thing too, because I think there's a really rich nuance to because you used football as an example, and I want to go back to that, but I'll answer your question first. So one thing that men could do they want to, once they realize that they've been conditioned to know and not care, to be a man as opposed to being more fully human, is go into a profession where caring is important. Become an elementary school teacher. Become a nurse. Have children and take at least half of the responsibility for the raising of them, as opposed to being the guy who's out there making the living, doing the hunting and gathering, while the mother is in with the children. So, but it's to understand the difference between caring and knowing, the difference between the need to be a tough guy, to be stereotypical, I'm using that language, and to be a caring person, and to look for role models. But one of the best is, if you want to be a CEO, you're inserting yourself into a masculine culture. If you want to be an elementary school teacher, and I'm saying elementary specifically because at the elementary level, both caring and knowing are important, but at that level, caring is much more important. Once you get past middle school into high school and universities, knowing becomes a thing. If you don't know your subject matter, you don't get a job, you don't stay long. But subject matter mastery isn't as important in the primary grades. Now, I didn't just say it's not important, because it has, there developmentally things have to be taught there. But if an elementary school teacher knows some basic math, English grammar, some basic history, some introductory science, and doesn't care about children, that person will fail as a teacher. They might keep their job in a bad district, but they won't be a good teacher. Caring is really important. So that's my, so immerse yourself in a place where caring is essential. That's what I would say for a man. But I want to go back to the football thing and the journalist thing, because I think that's a really rich example. And there are certain things that, as you were talking, came up for me. One is, we mentioned that women don't get to play football on those rare occasions that a girl has been allowed on a college team. And I think there's been a couple of women who have played on a high school team. I think there's been a couple of examples where, young women played on college teams, but it's very, very rare. And there are not a lot of people, girls and women looking to play that particular sport. That's one. But having said that, a good journalist doesn't need to have done the thing that he or she is covering. As an example, the best journalists, both written journalists and photojournalists who cover war, the majority of them haven't been military combat veterans. They're just really good journalists who are willing to put themselves in harm's way. They understand what's going on, the dangers, and they have a view of journalism, and they go cover a thing that's even more hyper-masculine than football is. I mean, effectively, football is based on a kind of war. Here's your territory, here's our territory. We're going to put the ball, when we have the ball, we're going to put it into your territory, try to stop it. So that's, that's a kind of loose metaphor, but it's not without merit. What I think is really important about what we were saying, though, when you mentioned that the women get called out as journalists covering football, when they move away from the analysis and get into the commentary about appearance or the personal stuff. In other words, when they begin to care about somebody's wardrobe or somebody's appearance or somebody's behavior, they get criticized. But as long as they stay with the analysis, which is a rational-based approach to being in the world, they're okay. So step back. They're covering a man's game, a sport that was designed by men for men. They're considered okay if they stay with reason and don't get into emotion. Reason being a masculine binary trait, caring and emotion being feminine. When you do the split, reason is the masculine side, emotion is the feminine side. Men don't acknowledge their emotions. women are emotional. Men are rational, women are emotional. So the very thing that we're talking about with football, women are trying to play as journalists in a game that was designed by men for men. There's the patriarchy again. And they're criticized when they show up with caring and step out of the analysis of the game. So where I want to go with this is, if we step all the way back, we look at war, politics, any sport. There might be one I'm not thinking of. Let's just stay with those: war, politics, any sport. How many of them were designed by women for women?
Right. None.
So it's all this patriarchal look, and it's women, young girls and women, still knocking on the door. So what would be very interesting is for men to enter into, which some men have done. This is why I said elementary school teaching, nursing. When you begin, and don't get me wrong, I mean, especially with nursing, there's both knowledge and caring there. And if you're a competent nurse, you have to know nursing, medicine, the physical body, and you have to care deeply. But it's the examples that we're using. If we step back and look, we're stuck in the whole patriarchal view, because it's all stuff that was designed by men for men. And women get criticized when they show up as women or bring what's stereotypically a woman's voice into the man's world. Now, ideally, as we're saying, we want both the caring and the knowing, both the reason and the emotion, to be human voices, not stereotypically masculine or feminine. But it's that insidious where, of course, a female if a male journalist did that, he'd still get called out, but he wouldn't get called out the same way. If a male, I mean, a good example is occasionally.
No.
Yeah. So Charles Barkley on Inside the NBA, like and I love Charles. I mean, he's, I think, one of the most honest people that's out there. I don't agree with everything he says, but probably 99%. But as an example, he calls out so many NBA players based on their wardrobes. When you see them coming into the arenas or leaving, and some of them wear clothes that he would never have worn. And he just laughs at them, and he does it playfully, and he can get away with that because he used to be the guy. He was a really dominant player. He's missing a championship ring, but he was an MVP. He was an Olympian. He's a funny guy. He's articulate. But if
Hello, Reggie, you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I am now, and I can see you clearly, and I know we just dropped there, so.
Yeah, our connection today has been very bad. You were doing a lot of buffering right before the connection dropped. And so I think most of, I would say at least 80% of what you were saying, I don't think it really came across
Okay,
because
that's
you're being
unfortunate.
buffered.
It was probably the
Can you
most
still hear me
inspiring.
pretty well now? Can you see me? Because you look
Yeah,
like you're
yeah,
frozen.
yeah. I can see you. I can hear you. The video just got a little bit less clear, but I can see you.
Yeah, unfortunately, this seems to be a really bad day. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm gonna have to contact the StreamYard, but you look like you're frozen. Am I frozen to you?
No,
Can you see me or hear me pretty well?
I can hear you well. And I
Yeah.
can see you pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we might have to cut our show short today just because of the technical issues. Because again, your picture's frozen, and if you're saying anything, it's definitely been buffered, or there's definitely a heavy delay. I'm not sure what's causing it or how to fix
Yeah.
it here shortly.
Yeah, I'm getting a delay from you too as well. Like I can hear your voice, and then the video is frozen, and your lips move. It just looks like a bad science fiction movie.
So why don't we go ahead and bring our show to a close today, and definitely revisit this topic again, because you were saying some very rich things that I definitely would love to have come across, or have our listener audience and myself hear that and engage with it. But unfortunately, we're not be able to hear that as well on today's show.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I would like to do this episode again. I mean, just from from the beginning, because I think it's important in a lot of ways. And, yeah.
So, listening audience, we're going to go ahead and cut this show short and work on our technical issues so that next Monday at 10 a.m., hopefully we won't run into these issues. We'll try to get things worked out long before then. But those who listen to us today, thank you. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And we'll definitely be back next Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.